The title of my remarks is Porn's Penumbras. And for those of you in the room who that means anything to, I would guess that it means, or that it triggers, thoughts of Justice Douglas's opinion in Griswold versus Connecticut, and particularly his discredited mode of constitutional interpretation from that opinion. Sure, Griswold maybe reached the right outcome as a matter of law. Two consenting adults should have access to contraception, sure. I certainly think that's right as a policy matter, but that outcome was reached in spite of its reliance on penumbras, or the outcome is right in spite of its reliance on penumbras, not because of it. One line from Justice Douglas, however, has particular relevance to our discussion today. He says that the First Amendment has a penumbra where privacy is protected from governmental intrusion. So I'll come back to that in a moment, but here's a spoiler. This is exactly what big porn is arguing to defeat age verification laws today. So let me start with first principles. The founding, of course, had nothing like Pornhub, but I think it's safe to say that the founders would not have considered Pornhub to be constitutionally protected speech. Indeed, I think there is little evidence that the founders would have considered depictions of sexual acts to be constitutionally protected speech at all. And if that originalist paradigm prevailed, porn could be banned altogether. In that world, we wouldn't even be talking about whether age verification laws were constitutional. It would be too obvious that they are. But here's where things get messy. And as with many things in constitutional law, the mess starts with the Warren Court. The Warren Court's obscenity doctrine probably supports the view that most of big porn's content is unprotected. So score one for the Warren Court. But the Warren Court's obscenity definition is hopelessly unstable and indeterminate on the internet. Some sex is obscene, some sex is not. So score one for big porn. On big porn's websites, who is to say which is which? And big porn might also, let's say, include a sportscast corner on their websites. Voila, some undisputedly protected speech. But set aside whether some of big porn's content is constitutionally protected for a moment. You would probably agree that it is also obvious that the founders would have let government keep children out of this porn-ridden zone. Maybe you agree because, like Justice Thomas, you think that adults have no right to speak to children without parental consent. Or maybe you agree because you think, like the modern court seems to, that the First Amendment has more play in the joints when it comes to protecting kids. But either way, everyone here grew up with the upshot of the obvious proposition that government can prevent businesses from exposing kids to porn. And here's something that the Warren Court got right. Government can tell seedy bodegas not to sell Playboy magazines to kids. And that is so even if the magazines have some pages about sports. Similarly, government can tell strip clubs that they cannot admit kids, and that is so even if some people in the strip club just want to talk sports with the kids. And of course, government can enforce these rules by requiring these businesses to check IDs. That's obvious. So how could the rule be any different on the internet? I think the impulse that the rules should be the same on the internet is what has animated many state legislatures to listen to Claire and Adam and pass age verification laws. Texas's law is illustrative and it is very simple. Porn websites must age gate to ensure that users are 18 or older. The statute gives them a number of ways to do that. They could scan your driver's license and they can also offer other options. And websites that don't do this are subject to civil penalties. Under Texas's law, these porn sites can host all of the filth that they want. They just have to verify adulthood before they let users in. So how could this be unconstitutional? Big porn's core pitch to the Supreme Court is that age verification is a burden on adults' ability to receive speech. So their premise is that there is at least some constitutionally protected speech on these websites, and the ID requirement is a burden on adults' ability to access this protected speech. Now, if that sounds strange to you, I think it should. Think about applying this to the physical world. Could an adult really say that his First Amendment rights are burdened when he has to show ID to get into the strip club? Like, just imagine the frivolity of the adult yelling at the bouncer about how his rights are being burdened. Or imagine an adult who protests at the bodega when the cashier asks for his ID before selling him a Playboy. No one would take this argument seriously in the physical world, and the law has been settled for some time now that ID requirements are permissible in these and a host of other settings. But big porn says it is different on the internet, and that is where we return to Penumbras. They say the internet is different because, and I'm going to quote their brief to the Supreme Court here, the internet poses unique security and privacy concerns. Namely, they say there's a risk of inadvertent disclosures, leaks, or hacks, and there is also the risk of state monitoring. The argument is essentially that adults will refrain from viewing porn because they are worried that the fact that they viewed porn will be exposed publicly or to the government. And that chilling, they say, violates their First Amendment rights. So I'm not here to take a position on whether those privacy concerns are reasonable in the abstract. I think it's reasonable for people to say that if they have to show their ID to get into the porn site, that someone might find out one day that they went to the porn site. But what does any of this have to do with the First Amendment? Can a strip club raise a First Amendment argument if, say, the cops post out nearby and see him enter the club? That might affect his privacy, but like, what does that have to do with the First Amendment to the US Constitution? Or imagine that zoning laws require strip clubs to have open windows and adequate lighting outside. That would increase this would increase the likelihood that members of the public could identify, hey, that's my neighbor walking into the strip club, and so that might affect the guy's privacy. But would that doom the zoning law under the First Amendment? Whatever one thinks about these privacy concerns, I think they clearly do not belong in the First Amendment analysis. But we are where we are doctrinally, so what to do? Like, first, in this and other battles, it's very important to emphasize publicly and frequently how absurd it is to create special constitutional rules for the internet that effectively make big internet platforms impossible to regulate. This issue is popping up with increasing frequency in this context and many others. Internet platforms, whether it's Pornhub here or Google in another context or Meta somewhere else, advance readings of the First Amendment and Section 230 that basically make their spaces complete law-free zones. In one of the court's major First Amendment cases this term, NetChoice versus Paxton, the big social media platforms actually argued that they have a First Amendment right to read and delete private messages between users. If modern First Amendment doctrine stands for that principle, if modern First Amendment doctrine says that we can't prevent porn purveyors from showing their porn to kids, then something is seriously wrong with modern First Amendment doctrine, and we should say so loudly. It is a fairly hackneyed cliche to say that Lochnerism has returned under the First Amendment, but the more cases you litigate against big tech or against big porn, you might come to agree that the Lochner charge is no cliche. And as a bonus, this is a major opportunity for cross-ideological collaboration. The left wants to regulate these platforms too, sometimes even in ways that we would not find objectionable. Second, while we will have to wait for the Supreme Court's views next term, I think legislators can make their age verification laws particularly safe under the Constitution by including provisions designed to protect user privacy. Texas's law has some of those very features, and that makes it very hard for big porn to say with a straight face that these laws burden First Amendment rights through their privacy penumbras. I'm looking forward to everyone's questions.